Hello everyone. Tonight we are going to drift gently into the folds of old velvet curtains, into the drafty corridors of Europe's candlelit palaces, and into the quiet, curious world of royal daughters. And what became of them when their family trees folded in on themselves like sleepy, overused napkins. We'll speak softly, meander slowly, and if you happen to doze off before Pope Gregory reforms the calendar or someone marries their niece, that's perfectly all right. This is boring history for sleep, after all. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from? What time is it where you are? Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You light a single candle. The wax is already dripping lazily down its side, like it's been burning since Charlemagne's coronation. The flame throws a soft, wobbly glow across the parchment before you, an enormous family tree, and it's complicated. The names stretch back into the misty past, loop sideways, crisscross, and then there it is. A rather unfortunate knot. It seems that in their fervent quest to keep power in the family, some of Europe's royals took the phrase "blood is thicker than water" a little too literally. Not content with simply marrying nobles of similar rank, they began marrying cousins, first cousins, second cousins, and occasionally you trace your finger over an inked branch. Maria Anna of Spain married her uncle Ferdinand III. They were both Habsburgs, and their daughter, Mariana, she married another uncle. The Habsburgs, it seems, made the family reunion, the wedding. This might sound scandalous now, but in their world, marrying a cousin wasn't just acceptable. The idea was to keep land, titles, armies, and all that delicious divine right contained in a neat little box, preferably one with a Habsburg crest. Still, even the monks who copied these family trees sometimes raised an eyebrow. One anonymous scribe in Vienna left a quiet margin note beside a particularly dense intersection of family lines. In this house, the Lord has much to untangle. You chuckle softly at that. The scribe might have been jesting, but the implications were no joke, because here's the first real historical detail for the evening. As early as the 16th century, physicians and court observers began to notice something was off. Royal children particularly. The daughters were delicate, prone to illness, emotionally brittle, sometimes brilliant, but often melancholy and oddly similar in appearance. And as time went on, especially in the Spanish and Austrian courts, certain features appeared again and again. Elongated jaws, broad, flat noses, wide-set eyes. The so-called Habsburg jaw wasn't just a cartoonish caricature, it was a genetic reality, mandibular prognathism, to be exact. That means the lower jaw juts out so far that the upper and lower teeth don't quite meet, making eating difficult and speech mushy. And yet, portraits still presented these princesses in splendid velvet gowns, necks stiff with lace ruffs, postures perfect. Their expressions, often faintly troubled, as if even they suspected the future of the dynasty was resting a little too heavily on too few chromosomes. You lean back and think, softly, that this might be a good place to mention a very real academic debate. Historians are still not in agreement on just how much inbreeding contributed to the decline of these royal lines. Some blame political incompetence, others the sheer chaos of succession wars. And some argue that the actual genetic load wasn't as catastrophic as popular legend suggests. But when you look at the family tree of Charles II of Spain, whose parents were uncle and niece, and whose own grandparents were double first cousins, it starts to resemble a snowflake or a very sleepy spiderweb. Even Charles's autopsy report, kept in dusty archives, reads like a lament. He had a heart the size of a peppercorn, a head full of water, and could not eat without assistance. He also never produced an heir. Now, of course, you are not Charles II. You are someone listening to a podcast with a fan humming in the background, and possibly a cup of chamomile tea in hand. Still, as you gaze into this twisted tree of royal blood, there's something strangely soothing in its predictability. Everyone married someone they already knew. Names repeated like lullabies: Isabella, Maria, Ferdinand, Philip. Isabella again. You remember a soft joke a librarian once muttered about these royal records. It's like trying to organize books by title when every third one is called Philip V. And while we're drifting, let's take a moment to appreciate one very odd off-topic fact. Did you know that in some Spanish courts, royal babies were swaddled so tightly that they were essentially kept in a rigid velvet cocoon for the first year of life? The theory was that straight limbs would ensure beauty, and nobility demanded perfect posture even in infancy. Some of these poor daughters were raised more like delicate porcelain than people, which perhaps explains a lot. You run your fingers along the edge of the old parchment. Wax pools beside your elbow. The names begin to blur slightly. The tree has no leaves, only loops, loops upon loops. And somewhere inside it, a quiet little girl sits still in her portrait, her chin more her father's than her own. You don't judge, you just listen. And maybe you start to feel your own thoughts soften, like the candle's edge flickering in the silence. The candle burns lower now. Its tiny flame wavers, like it's shy about what comes next. But you lean in anyway, gently, because something catches your eye on the wall. A portrait. The frame is gold leaf, of course, lavish and a little cracked at the corners, like a royal promise never quite fulfilled. Inside it, a young woman stares straight ahead, her eyes glassy, her chin rather prominent. You've seen this face before, or at least some version of it. The same heavy jaw, the same high Habsburg cheekbones, the same gaze that doesn't quite meet yours. It's as if someone took one template and quietly reused it for 200 years. A sort of divine copy-paste. Her name might be Maria Anna, or Maria Teresa, or Maria Antonia. Frankly, it's hard to tell. The Marias are endless and lovingly numbered. But you suspect even the palace painters sometimes forgot which one they were painting. Royal portraiture, you soon realize, wasn't really about accuracy. It was about symbolism, about displaying power, piety, marriageability, and that elusive trait, dynastic health, which is somewhat ironic, because the more you stare at the portraits, the more symmetrical things begin to look, and not in the flattering way: a prominent lower jaw, narrow temples, sparse eyebrows, the telltale signs of shared grandparents. It's all there, not hidden, just quietly gilded over. Of course, the artists knew better than to say it outright. They elongated necks, softened jawlines, added a flush to the cheeks. But even with the best oil paints in Europe, you couldn't paint away chromosomes. Not entirely. Though it resembles more of a gilded waiting room for quietly failing bodies. Here, royal daughters were nursed through mysterious illnesses, headaches that lasted months, fits of melancholy, persistent fevers, weak limbs, and sometimes just a vague condition called nervous delicacy. Depending on the prevailing theory of the hour, there's a velvet chair here, faded but intact. You picture a pale girl in it, her eyes lowered, her embroidery hoop, or kind, or lonely, or all three. But mostly, she was fragile. Too fragile to ride, or dance, or speak too loudly at dinner. And in some cases, though no one spoke of it, too fragile to bear children. That, of course, was the tragedy that hung over everything. The expectation of heirs. Sons were prized, certainly, but daughters were traded like treaties. A healthy royal girl was worth a small kingdom in dowries and diplomatic leverage. And when they weren't healthy, well, there were convents, or quiet bedrooms behind tapestries, or portraits that aged while their subjects stayed 16 forever. And here's your historical fact for this evening. By the 18th century, medical journals in Vienna and Madrid were beginning to cautiously connect recurring congenital issues in royal families to what they termed closed blood, a soft phrase for what we now call recessive disorders, hemophilia, and various craniofacial syndromes. They didn't have the genetics, but they had the patterns. One Spanish physician wrote, "The blood of queens has become too still. It needs," which is poetic and also his way of saying, maybe don't marry your niece. But you stay here a while longer, because there's something oddly calming about the predictability of it all. The quiet infirmary, the portraits that don't blink, the way illness was wrapped in lace and good manners, even the idea of treatment had a dreamy slowness to it. Doctors believed that music soothed the nerves, so viol players were brought in to play softly outside a princess's room while she tried to sleep. Some were prescribed embroidery, slow walks in the garden, and reading psalms in Latin they barely understood. Of course, there were theories, too. And here comes your open academic debate. Some historians now argue that not all the frailty recorded in royal daughters was truly genetic. They point to immense pressure, physical confinement, lack of fresh air, and the psychological strain of knowing your first kiss would likely come with a diplomatic treaty. Others insist that the genetic pool had simply become too shallow, especially in dynasties like the Habsburgs and Bourbons, where almost every major marriage circled back to the same bloodlines within 4 generations. But you leave that to the scholars. You, after all, are simply here to drift. You walk past another portrait, this one of Maria Carolina of Austria, one of Empress Maria Theresa's 16 children. She looks resigned. Her eyes have that subtle defiance of a girl who knows she'll be sent across the Alps to marry a cousin she's never met. Her chin, however, is unmistakably local, and as you pass under a heavy archway, a soft joke floats through your mind. A Habsburg daughter walks into a gallery, sees herself on every wall, and says, "Ah, family reunion." No one laughs, not out loud, but somewhere a candelabra flickers with amusement. You pause at a last portrait before bed. This one is unfinished, just the sketch of a girl's outline, the hint of a jaw, the faint beginnings of a crown. Maybe she died young, or maybe the artist gave up halfway through when the sitter fainted for the third time that week. You imagine the quiet that followed, the gentle lifting of silks, the murmuring of nurses, the brushing away of pigment. The room grows dimmer. The portraits seem to lean in, not hauntingly, just ... watching, waiting, tired. And so you return to the hallway, where the family tree hangs still, and the candle has shortened to a stub. Its light pools gently on a face you've already seen 3 times tonight. You wake or dream you're walking down a hallway padded with deep red tapestries, the air so still that not even the flames in the sconces dare to flicker. Somewhere a harpist is plucking the same 4 notes over and over. They say royal daughters lived lives of luxury, and in some ways they did. Silk sheets, gold thread, imported oranges. But you begin to realize something else, something quieter, that their world was padded not just with velvet, but with expectation, constraint, repetition. She's there, in the next room, a young princess. Let's call her Elizabeth, because there's always an Elizabeth. She's sitting on a small stool in front of a mirror that's older than she is. Her hair is being brushed 100 times by a woman who's not allowed to speak unless spoken to. The brush glides. The girl doesn't flinch. She's been trained for stillness. Her room is a collection of gentle imprisonments. A prayer book with a mother-of-pearl cover. A hoop of embroidery featuring an unfinished dove. A window that looks out onto a courtyard. She's not allowed to walk in unless the weather is perfect and her tutor permits it. You pause at the doorway and listen. Elizabeth's days are exactly timed. At dawn, she is prayed over. At breakfast, she eats eggs the cook was required to stir clockwise. At 9, she studies French, which she already speaks better than the teacher. At 10, she practices her signature 7 different versions for 7 different kinds of letters she may have to write. But all of it, every minute, is designed for one thing: marriage, not love, not even particularly polite companionship, just marriage, strategic, dynastic, and preferably arranged before the girl's first tooth falls out. A future sealed before the mirror ever had a chance to reflect much of anything. And here's your historical fact for this hour. In 17th century Austria and Spain, noble girls were often formally betrothed before the age of 5. Marriage contracts could be signed before the child could read them. There were even ceremonial cradles, exchanged literal royal baby gifts with promises attached. You lean on the doorframe and glance at her slippers. They've never touched mud. A palace maid was once punished for letting a breeze make her hem dirty. And yet, Elizabeth isn't especially sad. That's the strangest part. She doesn't know anything else. She's been raised to believe this is her path, her honor, her destiny. Her portrait will one day hang next to others. Her dowry will be enormous. Her jaw, ideally, not to Habsburg. Sometimes, if she behaves, they let her play a small keyboard instrument, like a harpsichord's introverted cousin. But even then, she must play only church-appropriate musicand, always in front of a chaperone. There is one report from a Spanish court where a girl was scolded for playing a melody that was deemed too French. You imagine the scandal. And here's a quieter curiosity, tonight's odd, off-topic detail. Some princesses were forbidden from smiling with teeth in portraits. It wasn't just about modesty, it was about teeth. Because of genetic issues, many royal daughters had overcrowded, misaligned, or missing molars. So they were taught to smile with restraint, lips closed, dignity preserved, gums politely hidden. Back in the hallway, you imagine a young girl holding in a giggle because protocol demanded it. Her governess called it royal composure. But even sleep can't keep you from wondering how many private laughs were lost to it now. Some scholars have speculated this is your academic debate, that the emotional isolation of royal daughters led to what we now might call psychosomatic illnesses. That is, symptoms born not of genetics, but of stress, headaches, fainting spells, sudden loss of voice. There are letters from governesses describing girls who lost the ability to speak for weeks, only to recover when a marriage match was broken off. Coincidence, perhaps. Or maybe a velvet cage has its own way of pressing on the chest. And so you follow Elizabeth again as she leaves the mirror. She walks slowly because she must. Royal daughters weren't supposed to hurry, not even joyfully. Running was for peasants and animals. Her gown makes a soft, swishing noise, like leaves on a pond. She passes you in the corridor, but does not meet your eyes. She's been taught not to. Instead, she turns into a prayer alcove, kneels before a gold crucifix, and closes her eyes. You notice the tiny tremble in her fingertips. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's everything. The room smells faintly of lavender water and candle grease. You linger at the door, wondering if she's praying for freedom, or simply for a tolerable husband. The candle at your side gutters again, reminding you that this is a story, not a life, and that somewhere, in some quiet archive, a faded letter from Elizabeth exists where she thanks her father for arranging her marriage to the cousin with the stronger lungs. There's no irony in it, just obedience. You whisper your goodnight. To her, she doesn't reply. She's not allowed. But the virginals play softly in the other room now, and you could almost drift asleep to it. You find yourself seated at a long oaken table, worn smooth by elbows, quills, and centuries of cautious diplomacy. The candle beside you flickers with nervous energy, as though even it knows that a single word misplaced here could start a war. Worse, a wedding. Across the table sits Brother Allard, a minor cleric with a major headache. His ink-stained fingers twitch as he scratches out yet another draft of a royal marriage proposal. The letter must be perfect, not just in sentiment, but in syntax. Every phrase counts. Every flourish has consequences. You peer over his shoulder and read a line: to Her Serene Highness, most illustrious daughter of the House of Wittelsbach, bearer of virtue and compliant temperament. You pause. Compliant temperament. Brother Allard sighs. Too strong, he mutters to himself. No, no, too honest. He scratches it out. It's not just flattery, it's courtship as calculus. Because in the 15th and 16th centuries, royal proposals were rarely spoken aloud. They were written, and almost always in Latin, the language of the church, of diplomacy, and, unfortunately for Brother Allard, of impossible grammatical traps. Here's your real historical detail for tonight. Most royal marriage arrangements began with carefully worded letters passed between courts. These were drafted by scholars, reviewed by bishops, and occasionally revised by monarchs themselves. Each word had to reflect honor, piety, and mutual advantage without accidentally insulting anyone's grandmother, because insulting someone's grandmother, especially if she was also your cousin, could cause considerable drama. You glance at Brother Allard's growing pile of discarded drafts. One was rejected because he called the princess modest in her virtues, which the Bavarians took to mean boring. Another omitted the phrase unblemished lineage, which led to an awkward inquiry about her great-uncle's side of the family. These were not just love letters, they were contracts. With lace, you sip imaginary wine and listen as Allard mutters Latin verbs like prayers, scriber, emitter, coniugere, to write, to lose, to unite, all dangerously interchangeable if you miss a prefix. There's something deeply funny, here's our soft joke for tonight, about watching a man with 3 theological degrees panic over whether he should say, Her Grace's virtue is unmatched, or Her Grace's virtue is comparable only to the Virgin Mary. He goes with the Virgin Mary, then crosses it out again. Too ambitious, he sighs. Across the table, another monk is sketching a seal for the letter. It must feature the appropriate coat of arms, flourished enough to impress, but not so grand as to overshadow the receiving family. The wax will be red, naturally, or blue. If the bride's family is particularly watery, you begin to notice that none of these letters talk much about the girl herself, not her thoughts, her voice, her favorite psalm or saint, just her dowry, her lineage, her agreeable disposition, and her excellent health, which, by the way, was often exaggerated. One famous letter described a princess as robust and joyful in her constitution, when in fact she had not stood upright for more than 10 minutes in the past month. This leads us gently into your academic debate. Some scholars believe that these letters were less about securing a marriage than testing political nerves. A court might send an over-the-top proposal just to see if the other side would flinch, or reply, or send an army. In this way, matchmaking became a form of medieval diplomacy, equal parts flirtation and surveillance. You imagine a room full of old kings reading between the lines of a single Latin phrase, wondering, did they just threaten us? Or are they offering us a niece? Meanwhile, somewhere far away, the princess in question is being taught to bow more slowly and to drink from a goblet, without showing her teeth. And here's your delightfully odd off-topic detail. In one known instance, a royal letter accidentally promised not only the princess but also all her family's blessed fertility, due to a poorly declined noun. The groom's court was reportedly delighted and confused, and a second letter had to be sent clarifying that no, the bride's aunts were not included in the dowry. You smile to yourself, picturing that mix-up arriving on a winded courier's horse. Good news, my lord, you're marrying into a package deal. The monks, by now, are getting drowsy. The inkpots have gone dry. Brother Allard leans back and stares at the vaulted ceiling, as if hoping God himself will whisper the correct phrasing. You find a candle holder to rest against and slowly exhale. There's something so wonderfully slow about all this. Days, sometimes weeks, to write a single letter, then months to send it, then months more to receive a reply, which may or may not contain the words "with great honor, we accept." And by that time, the princess might have grown a little taller or paler, or, in some cases, died. But still, the letters went on, flowery and stiff, diplomatic lullabies, full of hope, headaches. As Brother Allard seals the final scroll with a sigh, you see a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. The letter is finished, The ink is dry. The princess, somewhere across the mountains, has no idea, but maybe that's all right. Maybe she's playing the virginals in another drafty hall, thinking about nothing in particular. You smile as the letter is placed in its satchel. It will travel by carriage through forests and frost, across borders, and into another court entirely, all because someone needed to ask. In perfect Latin, if a girl they've never met might care to marry her cousin,